Hi, in this video, I'm going to give you a rundown of what's usually on those three shelves right there. The top shelf there, it starts off with a book called Chicks and Chained Males. It's basically a continuation of a group of anthologies that actually started on the shelf above it, where I had the first two books. This is the third book in the series. The series has stories, short stories, which feature female protagonists. The authors that wrote a lot of these stories are some of them are fairly well known, like Elizabeth Moon, Lawrence Watt Evans, Jody Lynn Nye, Katie Wentworth, people like that. Pretty well known. And then here's the fourth book. This is called The Chick is in the Mail. This one has uh, stories by Harry Turtledove, Charles Sheffield, Nancy Kress, and Eric Flint, just to name a few of the well-known authors that are in this one. Then we have The Sandman Companion, or sorry, The Sandman Book of Dreams. I haven't read this one. I've read some of the comic, The Sandman. I really like it. So there's that. I picked this up one day because I like the comic. And then I got this in a used bookstore somewhere. I think I paid like 25 cents for it. It's called Bodies of the Dead. I think it's full of pretty old short stories that are of the horror genre. There's Edgar Allan Poe is in this one. Guys like that. So there's that. Then we have this one here. This is Dark Delicacies 2, subtitled Fear, I guess. This one has, I read the first volume, it was pretty good, so I picked this one up. This one has some stories by Barbara Hamley, Joe Lansdale, Max Brooks, who is most famous for writing World War Z, and Greg Kihn, who, if you don't know who Greg Kihn is, he was in the Greg Kihn band. It was his band. So there you go. Then we get to the Solaris Book of New Science Fiction, Volume 2. I have volume 1 over there. I read it a while back. I just haven't gotten to volume 2 yet, but this one has some stuff by Robert Reed, Neil Asher, Peter Watts, Michael Moorcock even. Alistair Reynolds is in the next volume, which is volume 3, Solaris Book of New Science Fiction, volume 3. Right there. Pretty cool cover on that one. Then we get to something edited by George R.R. Martin and Gardner Dozois that was called Dangerous Women. And looking through the table of contents of this one, it's got a story by Joe Lansdale, which great writer, Lawrence Block, and George R. R. Martin has a story in this one too. Then we get to this one. This one's called Revelations. I don't know. I'm not sure what the theme on this one is, but you know, it's got some stuff by Clive Barker, some stuff by Lansdale again, some stuff by F. Paul Wilson, and a bunch of other authors that write this kind of fiction. And then we get to something that a lot of you may or may not like, just because of the name that's attached to it. I don't know, but it's L. Ron Hubbard's Writers of the Future. I have a whole bunch of these sitting over here. However, a lot of people don't realize that this contest actually launched a lot of careers like Nina Karicki Hoffman, Karen Joy Fowler, Dave Wolverton, better known as Dave Farland, a guy named R. Garcia E. Robertson, who publishes a lot of stuff in Asimov's. Sean Williams, I think he's Australian, pretty well-known science fiction author. A guy named Ron Collins, who publishes a lot of stuff in Analog and in Asimov's from time to time. Amy Sterling Castle, Tobias Buckell, Nettie Okorafor, and a name a lot of fantasy people are going to know, Patrick Rothfuss, the guy that wrote The Name of the Wind. All got their start, or at least were very early in their career in this competition. Then here's volume 2 of that one. This is from, let's see, this is from 86. So the competition started in 1985, so it's been going for a long time. Here is volume 3. I don't have a copy of volume 4. Or no, sorry. I do have a copy of volume 4 right there. What I don't have is a copy of volume 5, but I do have 6. I don't have 7, but I have 8. And there's 9. Yeah, 9. guess I missed 10 and 11. And there is 12 right there. And from that point on, I'm pretty sure I've started getting them all, because here's 13 and 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 with a great Frank Frazetta cover. The front side of that shelf continues with Riders of the Future. There's volume 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 with a great Stefan Martinier cover, 24, and the last physical one I have, 25. I say that because I've got the rest of them after this one in ebook format, because I like them. Sometimes there's some pretty good stories in here by people you've never heard of, but they're talented, some of them. Then we get to another shared world kind of a thing. I'm not sure exactly how this one works, but it's Wild Cards by George R.R. Martin. I know it has to do with superpowers and that kind of thing, and something about an asteroid coming close to Earth back in either the 1920s, 1930s, something like that, and giving people superpowers, changing genetics so that you're either, forget what it is, a wild card or a joker. I forget. One has powers, one doesn't. I don't remember, but get to those one of these days. Here's book 2, which is Aces High, and book 3, which is Joker's Wild. The first two look like they're full of short stories. This one, I think, is more of a novel written by a whole bunch of different people. If you're familiar with Peter F. Hamilton, you might know of the Night's Dawn trilogy. This right here is the Confederation Handbook, which is basically kind of a little mini tiny encyclopedia of stuff from the Night's Dawn trilogy. And anyone that's familiar with Julian May's Saga of Pliocene Exile will know this book here. This is the Pliocene Companion. So same kind, similar to the Confederation Handbook, just for Pliocene Exile instead of Night's Dawn, obviously. Then we get to Poul Anderson, Time Patrol. This book's full of short stories about I think it's about a almost like time cops, basically, that go back in time and try to prevent people from doing stuff by using time machines to make themselves rich or whatever. And here's a well-known author, Piers Anthony. This one's called Anthology, but it's not really an anthology because I think all the stories in it are by him. So, yeah, I think everything in it's by him. So it's not technically an anthology. It's technically a short story collection, I think. Then here's a collection by Charles DeLint called Moonlight and Vines. This is in his Newford setting, which is really fantastic. If you've never read any of those, just this guy is a great writer. There's just something about his stuff that feels very human and it's very relatable. To me anyway. Your mileage may vary. And then here is A Second Chance at Eden. Now, this is a group of short stories that are set in the Night's Dawn universe. So there you go with that. Then we get to some Robert Heinlein, some expanded universe, full of short stories. I don't know if all of these are, I don't think these are all tied together. But there you go, Robert Heinlein. And some Harry Turtledove, 20 stories, counting up, counting down. And here's an older collection by Jack Vance called The Augmented Agent and Other Stories. So looking forward to this one of these days when I get time to read it. And then we get to some Connie Willis books. Here's Firewatch, Impossible Things, and Miracle and Other Stories. And that's it for the anthologies and short story collections. And the one novel that's on the front of that shelf is Douglas Adams' The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul, which is part of the Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency series. So that next shelf down starts off with some children's fiction or maybe YA. I'm not sure what you'd classify it as. Here's Lloyd Alexander's The Book of Three. And then you've got The Black Cauldron, which is the second book in that series. And Disney made a movie out of this book I think it combined the Book of Three and parts of this book to make the Black Cauldron many years ago. Many years ago. Then you've got the Castle of Lear. He's looking like the Incredible Shrinking Man there. And then we've got Terran Wanderer and the final book, The High King. So 5 of the books in that series. Then we have the Last Rune series, which I read the first book, Beyond the Pale, and I never got around to getting to the rest of them, but here is book 2, Keep a Fire by Mark Anthony. And then The Dark Remains, Blood of Mystery. It's got some pretty cool covers on them. The Gates of Winter, The First Stone. Then we get to Greg Bear and a book called Slant, and another book called Queen of Angels. Now, I think these 2 books are related, and I tried to read this one at one point, and I only got about 100 pages into it. I bounced off of it because there was some passages that were just like complete stream of consciousness stuff that I just really didn't like. It's a lot of work to read stuff like that sometimes, and I didn't really care for it. So I DNF'd it at the time. I might get back to it someday. Here's one by Marion Zimmer Bradley, Julian May, and Andre Norton called Black Trillium. I think this was like a whole series, and this is the only book I got. This one is pretty old, but it's got this illustration of some of the characters in the front of it there. So pretty cool. Then we've got The Warded Man by Peter V. Brett. Picked this up at a thrift shop, and I picked these 3 books up at a yard sale. These are Kristen Britton's Green Rider series. There's book 1, First Writer's Calls, book 2, The High King's Tomb, book 3. These are pretty cool looking covers, so one of these days I need to get to it. Now we get to a guy that I've read a bunch of his books. I really like his stuff. This is The Voyage of the Jurl Shannara, book 1, Ilswitch. And then we have book 2, Anthrax, and book 3, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but that looks like it says Morgawr. So there's that. And then we've got a few more Shannaras here. This is the High Druid of Shannara series, and it looks like it says Jarka Rus, but I'm not sure if he's influenced by Nordic culture, but a Nordic person would pronounce that as Jarka Rus. So there you go. Here's High Druid of Shannara. This one's called Tainquill or Tanaquil. And then the final book in that trilogy is called Straken or Straken. Straken, probably. And then the last book on the back side of that shelf is Stephen Brust's The Phoenix Guard. I think this is set in part of the Vlad Taltos universe. So there's that. Continuing with Stephen Brust, we've got 500 Years After, more Vlad Taltos stuff. Here is The Paths of the Dead, which is referenced many times in the first few Vlad Taltos novels. The Lord of Castle Black. And finally, Sethra Lavode, who is a character that is in some of his books, some of the Vlad Taltos books. I picked this book up at the thrift store at Patch Barracks in Stuttgart, Germany. This is Jack Campbell's The Lost Stars, Tarnished Night. So I don't know if this is connected to anything else. Then we get to Orson Scott Card, Enchantment, and Orson Scott Card, Postwatch Redemption. One of these days I'm going to get to this one. I haven't read much Orson Scott Card. I read Ender's Game years ago, read it in like an afternoon because it was so good. But I've read 1 or 2 short pieces by him, and I really didn't like them. So I didn't proceed any further with reading much of his stuff. Then we got a book by Jeff Carlson called Plague War. There's 2 other books in this series, I think. I forget what the first one is, but I read it. What was it called? Plague Year. Yeah, Plague Year. So One of these days I'll get to that. Then we get Caleb Carr's Killing Time, his entry in the science fiction realm. And we get Jack L. Chalker's The Moreau Factor. I think this is a take on the Island of Dr. Moreau, but I'm not 100% sure. And a guy named Blake Charlton, a book called Spellwright. This is the first book in a series, but I don't have any of the others because I picked this one up. You can see the binding there's a little messed up. I picked this one up at a thrift shop. Then we get C.J. Cherry's Morgaine Saga, which is 3 books there. You can see those. And then there's a 4th book called Exile's Gate. I don't know if there's any more after this because I haven't read these, so I haven't bothered to check. Then we get to some Glenn Cook stuff, and it's not The Black Company. It is his Garrett P.I. novels. So here we have Bitter Cold Hearts, Cold Copper Tears, Old Ten Sorrows, Dread Brass Shadows, Whispering Nickel Idols, and Gilded Latin Bones. Most of these are pretty short. They're high on my TBR list because I'd really like to get into them. I'm interested in the whole detective aspect of that. Another Glenn Cook book that I have. This one's from the Instrumentalities of the Night series, The Tyranny of the Night. I don't know if this is any good. I don't think it's related to the Black Company at all. I think it's completely different. Here's one by Greg Cox called To Reign in Hell. You can see right there that that's Khan from Star Trek. And I have this book because I read The Eugenics Wars, volumes 1 and 2, and absolutely loved them because of the way they used real historical events on Earth. Pretty good books. This one I haven't read yet, though. I think this is after he's stuck on SETI Alpha 5 or SETI Alpha 6, whichever one it is. Sorry, Star Trek fans. Then we get to a Brian Daley book called The Doomfarers of Coromond. If the name Brian Daley sounds familiar, it might be maybe you read Star Wars novels, but he wrote the first 3 Han Solo novels, Han Solo at Star's End, Han Solo's Revenge, and Han Solo and the Lost Legacy. So that might be why you'd recognize the name. Here's another one of his books called Requiem for a Ruler of Worlds, with a really cool Daryl K. Sweet cover right there. And then last for that part of the shelf, we've got Footprints of Thunder by James F. David, looking like dinosaurs are either coming through some sort of time portal or some poor little kid's been sent back in time and making sandcastles on the beach. Now, for the back side of that last shelf there, we get to a guy who used to write a lot for comics. Maybe he's back into it. I'm not sure because I haven't read comics in a while. But I used to read a lot of X-Men comics, and I always hated the character Quicksilver. And this guy wrote one line of dialogue that completely changed my attitude toward Quicksilver. And it was in X Factor number 87, if you want to go find it. And that's Peter David, Sir Apropos of Nothing. This book is fantastic. It's got moments that are funny, it's got moments that are serious, and the ending really knocks it out of the park. This is probably one of my favorite unknown fantasy books that a lot of, it never got the praise that it deserved. And I wish more people had read it. And then it did well enough that there was Sir Apropos of Nothing, book 2, The Woad to Wooin'. And then book 3, Tongue Lashing. These will be out of order in the video. You'll see what I mean when I'm done with this shelf. Then we've got this book I picked up in the thrift store again. This is called Larissa by Emily Davenport. I'm not sure if it's sci-fi or fantasy, but I picked it up just because I like the cover. Then we get to Philip K. Dick and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, or Blade Runner, depending on what you want to call it. Haven't read that. Classic. Love Blade Runner, the movie, but one of these days I'll get to it. Then we've got these 2 extension novels that K.W. Jeter wrote. This is Blade Runner 2, The Edge of Human, and Blade Runner maybe 3, maybe just Blade Runner Replicant Night. So there's that. I read a book called Noir by K.W. Jeter a long time ago, and I didn't really like the style of it. I almost DNF'd it, and I got to a point where I just started reading the first line or two of each paragraph and then the dialogue just so I could get through the book faster. There was just something about it that really put me off of his writing. So, and I haven't tried anything else by him since, but one of these days I'll get to those. Then we've got William C. Dietz, Andromeda's Choice. This guy writes some pretty entertaining military science fiction. So, if you ever get a chance, pick this up. And then there's Logos Run, this is actually the second book of a duology, I think. The first book is called Logos, and it was pretty entertaining, just almost like just a big chase movie in science fiction form. And I'm not sure if this one continues that mode or what, but based on the cover, you can see the little guy running down there. Maybe it does. I don't know. Then we get some Area 51 books. I read the first 3 books in this series and didn't continue. Robert Doherty, the author, is supposedly a military veteran, but in one of the books, he had F-16s taking off from an aircraft carrier on a bombing run, and that kind of threw me because I don't know of F-16s taking off from an aircraft carrier because they're Air Force jets, not Navy jets, but maybe it happens. I don't know. I'm not all-knowing about that stuff. Anyway, here's Area 51, The Sphinx. This was like book 4 in the series. And then Area 51, The Grail. And then Area 51, Excalibur. I'm not sure how they're all tied together, and it's been so long since I read those other 3 books that I don't remember much of what happened in them. And here's Area 51, The Truth. I think this is the final book in the series. It's like 7 books long. Here's a Star Trek novel by Diane Duane called My Enemy, My Ally. Messed up binding, picked it up at the thrift store, so that's usually how you know. And here is a thing called the Riven Codex, which is related to David and Lee Eddings' the Belgariad and the Malorian. I read the Belgariad a long time ago when I was a teenager, and it kind of bored me. It took me a long time to get through all 5 books, even though they're relatively short by today's standards. But, I bought this when it came out just in case I ever decide to reread them. And now we get to a series that I have yet to tackle. I started to read the first book. I think I got 230, 240 pages into it, and it was really good, but it's so long and some of the books are so big that I couldn't get very far. It's a 7-book series, and it is A Crown of Stars by Kate Elliott. And here's the first one, King's Dragon. So that sits on, these take up a lot of space on the bookshelf. Here's book 2, Prince of Dogs. Book 3, The Burning Stone. Book 4, Child of Flame. Book 5, The Gathering Storm. Book 6, In the Ruins. And finally, Crown of Stars, the final volume. One of these days I'll get back into these because, like I said, the part that I read of the first book was fantastic. The characters were great. The stuff that they were doing was interesting. The stuff that was happening to them was interesting. And I just, for whatever reason, I set it down one day and I never managed to pick it back up because of life, I guess, getting in the way. And finally, we're at the front of that bottom shelf there. So first book is by a guy that I don't know if he ever wrote anything else. His name's Mark Fabi, and he wrote a book called Worm. It's basically about a computer hacker. I think it's got a science fiction bit to it. Talks about the apocalypse. So not sure where it goes from there. Then we get to David Farland, whom I mentioned earlier as Dave Wolverton / David Farland. Here's book 1 of the Rune Lords, The Sum of All Men. Then we get book 2, Brotherhood of the Wolf, with these really great Daryl Sweet covers. Book 3, Wizardborn, right there. Book 4, The Lair of Bones. Now, I read somewhere that the first 4 books are one series, and then the next 4 books took on the son of one of the main characters in the first 4 books and went with him. So I only have 2 of those next 4 books. 5, Sons of the Oak, and book 6, Worldbinder. So again, great covers on these things. One of these days, I'll get the other 2 books, probably as an ebook, since I live in Sweden now and don't really have an easy way to get them. I don't like paying the import fees on physical objects, so it's a lot easier for me to try to get ebooks if I can. Here's one by a guy I never heard of, Matthew Farrell. This is called Thunder Rift. Looks like it's some sort of science fiction thing with some either a giant unstable wormhole or something like that in outer space. Then we get to some Raymond Feist. Now, I loved Magician Apprentice and Magician Master when I read them. I guess they're printed as one book called Magician in the UK. I don't know why they split it up in the States, but great books. And then the third book for those is this one here, Silverthorn. And then we get A Darkness at Sethanon. And I have a whole bunch of Feist books in ebook format, and I don't know where this one falls. Conclave of Shadows, book 1, Talon of the Silver Hawk. So I don't have any other physical copies of the books in this series, so I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that. It's easy enough to get the ebook, but you know. Then we get the Serpent War Saga. I've got all 4 of these. Shadow of a Dark Queen, Rise of a Merchant Prince, Rage of a Demon King. This one here, you can see it's got this fold-out cover that has this illustration there. Pretty cool looking. And then Shards of a Broken Crown, the last book in that series. I really liked Magician, like I said. One of these days I'll get back into those and read the rest of them. And there's a lot of them, so plenty of time taken up for that. Here's Eric Flint, 1636, with a couple other authors. There's a book called 1632, if you're not aware of it. It's 1632. There's this town in West Virginia that gets yanked out of their time frame and sent back in time to like the period of the 100 Years' War in Europe. And since they know how to make gunpowder, they start to do really well for themselves and help out different factions within the 100 Years' War. So, and this is he continued on with a whole bunch of different plot lines from that stuff. And here's another Eric Flint and David Drake, In the Heart of Darkness. I don't know. I think this is probably the first book of a series, or at least part of a series anyway. I'm not sure what it's about, but it's probably based on Roman legions and actual history, just transported into maybe a futuristic setting. Not sure. Then we get Michael Flynn's Firestar. It's a very chunky book right there. So what is this thing? Almost 900 pages. So looks like near Earth science fiction. And here is C.S. Friedman's In Conquest Born. Now, everybody always talks about her Cold Fire trilogy, and I had that at one time, and I read the first book, and I just didn't like it. It took me forever to get through it because there was a whole lot of navel gazing going on, and it just wasn't for me. I ended up giving the series to a friend of mine who wanted to read it. So I just didn't like it. It wasn't my cup of tea, I guess. And then the last book on that shelf is The War Against the Tor, David Gerald. I think I have these out of order because I think I have book 1 on another shelf up there, but this is A Day for Damnation, which is book 2. So I must have gotten this out of order when I moved these bookshelves into this room. Anyway, that's what was on those 3 shelves there, and hope maybe this has given you either some nostalgia for books that you've already read or given you ideas for books to look for either in the bookstore, online, or maybe even in your local thrift shop or used bookstore. Anyway, until next time, bye for now.